My relationship with this place has always been provisional. I grew up in the Piedmont, South Carolina, not sea level, but that land in between, foot of the mountains, hilly country. And we used to get in my mother's old DeSoto when I was in elementary school, and she'd throw me in, and we'd get my uncle in there, and he'd have a six-pack of beer hidden in the trunk. And we'd drive up to Saluda Grade and have lunch at one of those concrete tables along the Saluda Grade, eat fried chicken, drink sweet tea, and my uncle would sneak off and drink the beer. And then I knew we'd go home. I knew we'd head back home after that wonderful respite, that wonderful little moment of magic. And I've continued that life now into my 50s. Thomas mentioned that I worked for the Nana Hale Outdoor Center. I worked there for 10 years, but I knew that I wasn't going to stay there. I knew that it was a place that you pass through. People have stayed there, but most people who've worked there in the 25 or 30 years it's been in operation have just passed through and touched on that magic of this place and then gone on to live their lives in some other place. My place on Johns Creek, I feel that way. There have been people there for 10,000 years probably at the spring there where our cabin is. But at some point I won't go up there anymore, and it'll pass on, and it'll be a provisional relationship as well. So I think I started beginning to touch on the magic of this place and how I could touch it and then go away from it and be happy with that when I was in college. And I want to end my remarks by reading a very, very short poem that I wrote when I was a senior in college. I would escape to the Blue Ridge Mountains, not the Smokies, mountains to the east of here, and I'm going to read. Get my old man glasses on, like everybody else. I'm going to read a poem, a very short poem that I wrote when I was in college called Waking in the Blue Ridge. It's 35, 40 years old now. In the animal light of early morning, dreams persist, but I'm quickly victim to the world's precision. How oaks become one in a web of blue above, and the fox burst toward the nested quail, or in tricks of color, copperheads coil where they could not be. All this in the hour before breakfast, in the heaven of unnoticed verdancy and light. Thank you.
George said something about the flatlands. I was recently in Amsterdam. Somebody pointed out to me that I was 9 meters below sea level. That was weird. I didn't like that feeling at all. And I had this sort of despairing feeling about my grandchildren who are being raised down around Raleigh where it's less than 1,000 people. I've got to get them up here. I want to say just a couple of words to you about book title, because my first novel is called Catalucci, and that's obviously the name of a place. I was talking to a friend who was talking to Robert Morgan while I was writing this book, and Robert said, well, what's the title of it? My friend said, Catalucci. And Robert said, God, I'd kill for that title. That was when I was wanting to call it 20 Miles from Cold Mountain. I got talked out of that. I fell in love with the place Catalucci when I was in my adult years. I was about 30 the first time I ever went there. I went there because I had found that my great-grandfather had been killed there. I was also born there. My grandfather was born there, and I had, as they say, I had people there. My father was not born there, and he was the sort of person who, when you said family reunion, he went 70 miles an hour the opposite direction. So I never went to these things when I was a kid. and therefore I missed a lot, I think. But the first time I went into Cataloochee, I was in my early 30s, and I looked around, and honest, this was the first thought I had. This would make a great place to set a novel. I didn't say this is where my ancestry is. I thought this would be a place to set a novel. Of course, the next question you ask is, what's the story going to be? I had to wait another 20 years to figure that out. But it started with the sense of place. Now, I'll just end by saying that both of my books are about the people who used to live in Cataloochee before the Park Service took the land. And I am very happy that the Park Service took the land. We have 500,000 more or less acres that will be preserved forever, I hope. If they'll quit trading one piece of it here and another piece of it there. But we have something that I wanted to tell the story of the people who left because there was a human cost to that. And one of the things that these people wrestled with was, how do I leave this place? Because the government gave you a choice. You could stay if you abided by all their rules, or you could go. And there were a lot of people who stayed for a few years and said, I can't take this anymore. I've got to be able to pasture my cattle somewhere besides where I grow corn. You know, that kind of thing. They won't let me plant on the slopes anymore. Where is there land that isn't a slope? So eventually, a lot of the people just said, the heck with it, I'm leaving. But they wanted to know how they were going to exist without this place. And particularly, is the government going to take care of our cemeteries? Are we going to be able to come back and tend those graves? And that was an issue that was of greatest importance. Oh boy, I didn't say that. But to these people, and I really appreciate that. Thomas, I'm not really working on the third part of the trilogy, but I am working on another novel, and it's based on one of the characters in Cataloochee. I hope you like it.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me out there?
Speak loud.
Right there, is that?
Yeah.
All right, I grew up over in Andrews. And those of you who lived out in this tip of western North Carolina back then, they remember how remote it feels. I mean, the rest of North Carolina totally forgot about us. I lived in Raleigh for a while, and people would ask where I was from, and I said, well, I'm about 2.5 hours west of Asheville. And they would look at me and frequently say, I didn't know there was any North Carolina, 2.5 hours from Asheville. I was thinking about this issue of what have these mountains meant to me? What has this place meant to me? And one of the first things that came into my mind was, as a little boy, like second grade, this time of year especially, sitting in the classroom, watching that big black and white clock on the wall over the blackboard tick its way toward 3 o'clock, because my friends and I would go up on the mountain. We were lucky to have a little mountain right in our backyard that our parents trusted us to, not get lost and die on. So every fall, it was like 3 o'clock, if the weather was good, we were going to be up there until supper time. That sense of freedom, and that sense of this place having been occupied for a long time. You get up there, you saw the logging roads, you saw that there was an old, maybe it was a little shallow mica mine or something like that up there that we were not supposed to go in because we might die there, which meant that we just loved to go in. Our parents, it was a different time. Our parents, by the time we were 12 maybe, let us carry guns, and yet we managed not to kill each other. it just was this place of freedom, but you also had this sense of, of this long history. This new book of mine, I thought for a long time about calling it No Wilderness, steal a Gary Snyder term and maybe an old Buddhist term, that when a place has been occupied as long as this has, that there really isn't a wilderness. There's more damaged places and less damaged places. And there's a little bit of this book that addresses that I thought I might read. The main character is this young woman who's had her dead sister's 2 preschool children sent to live with her by the state. And they have, it's November, it's near the end of the book, they've disappeared. They're up on a big mountain, like a Mount Pisgah-sized mountain. And she's been looking for them for 2 days and wasn't been there. And she's out there thinking she has no idea. She's hunted and hunted. She's looked everywhere she can think of. And she's thinking about the land and what it is. Many turnings present themselves. Plenty of opportunities, choosing one faint passage over another. These mountains are no wilderness. They've been lived in for thousands of years. Many old nobodies, long gone to earth, left their marks on the land, subtle or not. Gangways stretching back beyond buffalo days to a distant ice age became Indian trails. Little foot-wide hunting paths and broad valley trails linking towns, each with its pyramid. Roads broad enough for helmeted Spaniards and their horses and scores of pigs and captives to make 20 miles a day of their traverse through here. 200 years farther on, many paths for horny colonial merchants and botanists and preachers coming to the highlands to make money and mixed blood babies. Then American soldiers burning the villages so that the townhouses at the tops of the pyramids became nothing more than a layer of charcoal. Some of these same roads became exile trails for the Cherokee, endless trails for the many who never reached the end. On the same mule tracks and wagon roads, the deluded gray boys traveled to war. Then sunken logging roads and skid paths from the end of the previous century, and narrow gauge rail beds from the early clear-cut days of this century. Everywhere loose looks, the ground lies webbed with lines of passage. A maze for the children to get lost inside and never come out.
Okay, well, this is what you've all been waiting for. If anyone has any questions for an individual, any of the individuals here on the panel, or a group question that they just want to shoot out for someone to answer, now is your chance.
Charles, the story of Will coming to the store as a young man, in your mind, where was that? I mean, I've done a little bit of reading on William Holland Thomas and had a store here in Scotts Creek area. I just wondered, is that the one?
Well, I did lots of reading on where stores at various times in his life were, but I just kind of imagined the place. It was not a specific place at all. It was just the main thing was for this 12, 13-year-old boy to be isolated at the beginning. I'm always interested in characters that are isolated and how they find a way to connect to the world. The way he found was through this group of Cherokee that accepted him when he felt kind of cast out from his family and the rest of the world. So it was an imaginary place, not exactly where his real stores were.
Anyone else?
Charles Frazier. I always wondered, friends and I have argued as to why you ended the story the way you did. Is it because it was a true story? Because you said you you gathered some information from your family history in Inman, and because his story is the story of Odysseus. But Odysseus didn't die. Why didn't he
Well, the real ancestor that I based the story on did die in a shootout with the Home Guard in Haywood County. And it didn't happen on Cold Mountain. It happened at I'll tell you the name off in a second. I was at a family reunion a couple of years ago, and somebody said, I don't know why in the world you call that book Cold Mountain. Pete Inman didn't die on Cold Mountain. He died on Big Stone. So you should call it book Big Stone. But he died. I knew that writing the book all the way, so it really wasn't a way to change the ending to be happy.
I'm a librarian. I work at Western with George, and here we are in the beautiful New Jackson County Public Library. So I'd like to ask any of you who want to answer, what kinds of research do you do in libraries?
I would be remiss sitting in this beautiful new complex if I didn't say something about my mother, who was a librarian for 30 years at the Madison County High School. And I think the greatest gift that you can give a child is a hunger to want to read. I think more than anything else, any other legacy you can give them, if you can make a child early in their life attach their imagination to the idea of reading books, it'll save their life, and it will change their life in ways that will happen no other way. I'm a poet, but I've always go into libraries in whatever city I'm visiting. I also have bands for years and years, so I'm always traveling, sometimes 200 days out of the year. And I like to go into cities wherever we go into the library and hang out. People would ask me, where are you from? Is there a library where you are? And I would always say, well, there's a little bitty library, but you have to ride a pregnant mule to get there, so you got to ride it back. And we're also far enough out, where all the, you guys know too, all the cows have one leg longer than the other. But I think that the library also was for me. I can remember sitting in Marshall, and if you guys haven't been to Marshall, North Carolina, recently, you won't recognize the place. How many of you? How many of you have been to Marshall, North Carolina, in the last 5 years? All right, that's fantastic. Now more of you need to come because I'm telling you, it's changed. We can now have a cold beer. We can sit down by the river. There's coffee houses. You can play music down there. They have art galleries. I don't even recognize the place. Every time I go back, I'm astonished. I can't even hardly believe it. And all these little communities, this is happening, and then the old timers go, oh, it's liberal. This boy's getting down liberal right here. And I know it's a little frightening because change is frightening. I just recently 4 years ago, I bought a 100-year-old church out in Shelton Laurel. And I picked it up and moved it 2 miles down the road. Put it on top of this mountain. And we're trying to renovate it for an art center and a recording studio. And originally, we thought the church that I grew up singing in that I mentioned a minute ago was Enon Baptist Church, which has now been torn down. One of the most beautiful little 120-year-old churches I've ever seen. And they replaced it with a place that looks like a damn Costco. It's all metal. It's one of the ugliest buildings I ever saw in my life. I hope they raise the spirit in there because, things are flat in that building, I'm telling you. But I think part of my response to losing that church, in some ways, the church and the library are in some ways, always the center of a community in a lot of ways. And I think my response to losing that church was the fact that I bought the other one and restored it. And I'll throw out a little challenge to some of you. There are a bunch of these little 100-year-old churches that are falling to ruin, that are sitting all over Western North Carolina that you can get for next to nothing. And I'm telling you, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to sit in that sanctuary right now. And even if I'm singing to myself and think about it, and that building, by the way, was a library before it became a church. The steeple sits in the middle, not in the front. You know how most churches you walk in the church, the steeple greets you first thing, right? This steeple sits in the middle of the church, and we found books that were in there that were 200 years old that were in that library and stuck away. So to me, I don't even know who I would be without a library. You know, I don't know how my life would exist without.
I don't think I've ever seen a library that I didn't like. How many of you would admit to either being a librarian or having an intimate relationship with someone who is a librarian? The prerequisite for this is having a pet rat mentality. Have you ever thrown anything away? Catalog everything and cross-index everything. One of the finest librarians that I've ever known is here, and he talked earlier to you, George Bazal. George, could you stand up and tell us a little bit about your peculiarities?
Librarian-wise. Well, I have no peculiar heritage. The closest thing to, I do have a list at home of every music album I've purchased in chronological order for the past 40 years. Although I know most of you will say, George, that is perfectly normal. I can tell you that yes, indeed, I did buy Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run in 1975, and I want to wish Bruce a happy birthday today.
The library that